A whistleblower released the details of a phone call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky. That was the catalyst for the impeachment inquiry against Trump. Yesterday on Meet the Press, Congressman Schiff told Chuck Todd why the intelligence community won't be hearing from that whistleblower.
We had a deep interest in having the whistleblower testify until two things happened. One, we were able to prove everything in the whistleblower complaint with witnesses that had hand information. And second, the president and his allies effectively put that whistleblower's life in danger. The president said the whistleblower and others should be treated as a traitor or a spy, and we ought to use the penalty we used to use for traitors and spies, and that's the death penalty. So here's the thing, Chuck. We don't need the whistleblower's secondhand evidence anymore. It would only serve to endanger this person and to gratify the president's desire for retribution, and that is not a good enough reason to bring in the whistleblower.
So what are the protections for whistleblowers in the U.S., and what does this particular whistleblower mean for American government? Allison Stanger, a political scientist and the author of the book Whistleblowers, Honesty in America from Washington to Trump, came by to explain all that.
Whistleblowing is as American as apple pie. We passed the world's first whistleblower protection law in 1778. That is before the Constitution was even ratified. So it really is an American phenomenon, and that's why you saw both Democrats and the Republicans in the Senate unanimously vote to turn the whistleblower complaint over to Congress. Normally, we respect whistleblowers and investigate their complaints rather than trying to out them or incite retaliation against them. The word whistleblower seems to have come from 19th century Britain, and it was used to both refer to a policeman blowing the whistle to stop a crime, or a referee at a football match, or what we would call a soccer match, blowing the whistle on someone who's violating the rules. So it really originates in someone attempting to keep us safe, make sure the rules are upheld. Whistleblowers are important in fighting corruption, and anti-corruption initiatives are essential for the rule of law. The founders were really concerned with not making the same mistakes that England had made. They thought that the crown was corrupt, and they fought the revolution in order to put in place a new republic that they hoped would prevent the same sort of corruption taking root in the United States. So they were very keen to protect the abuse of public power for private gain. They made elected officials divest themselves of all their private ownings just because they thought if you're serving the public, you shouldn't even have the appearance of serving yourself. Many people think that all leakers are whistleblowers. But that simply isn't the case. We've got a long-standing tradition of whistleblowing that's rooted in the rule of law. So the best way to think about this is all leakers are not whistleblowers, but all whistleblowers are leakers. And the way we distinguish a whistleblower from a leaker is that a whistleblower is revealing misconduct, oftentimes corruption, whereas a leaker may just be trying to shift policy in a different direction. And that, to me, is what is so striking about the current situation, is that there's no way to spin what the Trump White House was doing with respect to Ukraine as a policy issue. We have a long tradition of whistleblowing and protecting whistleblowers in the United States. So the idea of outing the whistleblower or inciting retaliation against him or her or forcing them to testify, that's something entirely new. No previous president has done that before. And so if he's successful, that will have a profound chilling effect on any future whistleblowers coming forward. And indeed, that's what the Trump White House is trying to do. But again, that's not how democracy operates. That's how a dictatorship operates. This is really a question of the system itself. It's neither Democrat nor Republican. It's not a partisan issue. And in such a circumstance, we need whistleblowers to come forward to right the American ship of state and keep democracy alive. Whistleblowing is often an agent of change because what whistleblowers do is they speak truth to power. Whistleblowing leads to new laws being written because once there's a scandal and a leader is removed from office, Congress typically responds to be sure that those abuses won't recur. Take the Intelligence Community Inspector General. That's the apparatus through which the CIA whistleblower complaint rose that's rocking our country today. That's put in place after Watergate because Congress looked at Nixon's abuse of power and tried to legislate to be sure that didn't happen again. We can legislate to make national security whistleblowing less perilous. We can also pass anti-corruption laws that make it very clear what the emoluments clause of the Constitution means in the 21st century. So there's all sorts of things we can do in response, and history really shows us that we can be in horrible circumstances, and thanks to a whistleblower, put things right again.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.